When you hear the word masculine, you probably picture the stereotypical vibe of masculinity. Someone who's very dominant, muscular, and gets all the girls. But that is not the kind of masculinity that I'm going to be talking about today. Maybe based on the title and your idea of what Sweden is, this feminist utopia, you think that I'm going to be talking about them Swedish men are truly masculine in being non-toxic and not having toxic masculinity. Well, you'd be wrong. So Jordan Peterson might not be as relevant today, but once upon a time he was very relevant. And I remember something that he specifically talked about was how Scandinavian men have innate gender differences, and that Scandinavian men are actually overrepresented being more masculine in a sense. So Swedish men are actually statistically more thing-oriented. What does that mean? They gravitate towards STEM fields like engineering, tech, and highly systematized work. They are disproportionately present in libertarian online spaces, tech subcultures, digital privacy, and open source communities, engineer-heavy career paths. It's not just political libertarianism, it is psychological libertarianism. When I say libertarianism, I'm not only talking about political libertarianism, I'm talking about specifically being more thing-oriented. This type of masculinity exists outside of Sweden. A lot of Swedish culture also exists outside of Sweden. A lot of people would describe social isolation, secularism, individualism as Swedish, and even socialism, social democracy, humanism probably, as a very Swedish temperament in society, if you will. Obviously, these things are not exclusively Swedish. They exist in other Western countries or around the world. It's just that Swedish people are so overrepresented in these things that if you would look at everybody in the world and look at people who are the most humanist, who are the most humanitarian, and who are the most secular, who are the most feminist, who are the most socialist, Swedish people would be overrepresented in that. They would be in the heart of those people, and they would be overrepresented in the people who are the most of these things. And just like that, there's the other side of that as well. That is, the Swedish men they are overrepresented in this type of masculinity. So the type of masculinity that I just described and what Jordan Peterson was talking about, this type of psychological libertarianism, to be more things-oriented, focus on things rather than people, emotions, and social nuance, which is more the stronger suit for women. People who are into psychologically libertarian hobbies like engineering or careers, not only hobbies, like engineering or an open source culture, or being very much like pro open source work, or having the value of digital privacy. These things exist outside of Sweden as well. Of course, they are not exclusive to Sweden, but Swedish people, especially Swedish men, are very overrepresented in people of this temperament. They're very overrepresented in this demographic. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are like this in America, in the UK, the rest of Europe, and even around the world. But just like I said, with mainstream Swedish culture, which I described as individualist, maybe socialist or humanist, secular, very secular, and individualist. If you had all the people in the world, you would see Swedish people be super overrepresented in the people who are most like that. Similarly, you would see Swedish men very overrepresented. If you gathered all the people who have these psychologically libertarian qualities, you would see Swedish men overrepresented in the people who are most like this, psychological libertarian. And chances are that you know this from your experience. If you look at online spaces, Swedish people overrepresented, especially Swedish men overrepresented in more libertarian-oriented spaces online, like Reddit. And you could argue if Reddit is libertarian or not, but there's definitely a very libertarian component or aspect of Reddit. If you look at online spaces for people who have libertarian political views, you would see Swedish people overrepresented there. So to conclude, when I say that Swedish men are more masculine, I'm not talking about the stereotypical idea of how we think of masculinity. I'm talking about being more thing-oriented psychologically, a type of psychological libertarianism. And Swedish men are very overrepresented in those spaces.